Hi, in this lesson I will discuss about repository pattern. In my previous lecture was how to configure entity framework, and now repository pattern and UnitOfWork pattern I will demonstrate. And first of all, I start from the beginning of how to create a repository pattern. First I need a folder named repositories. This folder will include all of my repositories. This is my repository class, repository. Now I'll create a company DB context in parameter constructor. I used access protected access modifier to inject company DB context. I have created a company DB context field, and now I'll use this inside the constructor as a parameter constructor, and I'll create a DB set. This DB set is a generic properties, private DB set. Then I'll inject this inside the constructor. I set DB set using context set. This is I'm going to run on that constructor context, and it also a context. Now I set DB set below. I will assign a DB set below context. From the context I will set t. It will use as a generic base method. Now at first I will create a method name. I will create a method for adding entity. Before going to this method, I will discuss what is the difference between T and entity. T is a placeholder of any type. I can use instead of T I can use any class or interface, but here I want to declare T user, where T user class. It's a generic T. T means a type. Now I'll create a public task, because this is asynchronous programming. Public T task, add T entity, dbset, add async entity. This is showing error because I did not use async. And I not use wait. It's working now. Now I'll create another method named getById if I want to call the data by ID. Public async T task T get by and ID. This will call data by using ID. It will return dbset find async by ID. This is await, and it will use before to use. It's working now. No error found. Now I will create another method named getAll. But now, before going to implement getAll method, I want to verify my repository pattern work or not. It is supposed that if my repository will not work, I don't need to more implement method, because without confirm my repository working or not. Okay, now recap everything. That at first I created a repository class and I used T as a class. T is a type, and I use protected access modifier to implement db context, and I have created db context, this db context, in my previous lecture, entity framework configuration lecture. Now I'll create a db context. This db context is used for connecting several SQL database. Now I private read-only dbset. I set up a base property, and we use both properties inside the constructor as a parameter constructor parameter. And I don't need this dbset because I assigned a value using context and set. Another is I want to create interface, repository interface, because I want to reuse everything, and low scaffold I want to use low scaffold with dependency injection. I use dependency injection. That's why I need to create an interface by using this method. If I select this, then if I quick connection, then if I extract interface, it will show me my both of my method add and get by int id. My interface is created, and also it inherited by automatically. Now I will create repository class. Created a repository class. Now we move to create company repository. Company repository is the interface. I need to create company repository because I want to use this in company service. Company repository. It will inherit from the existing repository interface. And T replace, instead of T we replace company. It's working. Now I can connect repository method using this company repository interface. Now we'll create a company repository class. Company repository class, and this class will inherit from repository interface and replace T in company model. Then we will inherit our existing company repository interface. This interface is for restore the dependency injection into the program.cs file. This error showing that we need to create constructor and pass it to the base repository. This constructor parameter was DB context parameters. That's why you need company DB context and context, and we need to pass it to the repository because this constructor created to the repository class. It's now working fine, no error showing. Now SQL Server we created in our previous lecture. Now we need to create an application folder or service folder. This was my service folder, service implementation. And we will add a service, company service. At first we need to create a constructor. We implement repository. And this repository use the constructor, so the constructor is used. Then we need to create a method. Before going to create the method, we need to register this repository, and Now we'll restore this service builder. I'm using add transient lifetime. I'll discuss my next video about add transient and scope singleton. It is a company I have restored my company repository. Now I will create a method called task async task add. We need to create a request and response messaging, and it will place in a separate folder. Create company request. Property will be company name only, string. And we have another request, means we need another request as a response. If I want to respond to anything, I can do it using it, but now we don't need response. We'll use request company request. Create company request. I need to create a new object of a company. I have created a company object and assigned to this request, and next I have created repository add function and add method I used to store data from the request as a company name. Now I will create another method name get by ID. Now I need to create a response. Get company response. Company response will be company view. I need to create a view into the video view model folder. This company view will map to the company domain. To properties, and call this view from the view model. Now company response is created. Now we apply get company response and get by call int id. Then we call using repository pattern. We call using repository, await repository. At first we need an object of instance of a company response class as a response new. Then this response I have called a company using ID, and I have assigned this company model. Now I'll create return response, but we need mapping using automapper. Before using automapper, we need to install map automapping. We need to install automap from menu get package. For this incomplete method, my automapper does not installing.